Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live Q&A and news stream. Hopefully, you're all having a great Tuesday so far. We're going to get into all of the latest in Star Wars news, and as the last few months have kind of been, there's been almost no news for Star Wars until like the last second before we went live here about 5 o'clock ish Pacific time. We get the news that Matt Smith has been tapped to be the villain of the Star Wars Starfighter film. This is coming from Deadline, so it's as official as it gets without Lucasfilm actually putting their own statement out. So we're going to talk about that as well. Matt Smith's return, as many of you might remember, he was originally cast for The Rise of Skywalker in a role that has been debated over the years what that actually was. And he is returning to Star Wars for the first time since then, as obviously he was cut out of that movie. So he never made it into an actual role in the film. So this will be his first big Star Wars appearance in live action film. And we will be talking about that as well as some of the other news. We got the really, to me, surprise reveal of the Star Wars 50th anniversary re-release this past week, pretty much a year in advance. I don't know why they did that, but I guess start generating hype, get the celebration going. It's not just the 50th anniversary of Star Wars or Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope. It's the 50th anniversary of the entire brand. Star Wars as a whole is celebrating its 50th anniversary, as well as Lucasfilm is it's celebrating its, marquee property. So they've got to get this pumped out. And I guess the positive news by seeing this is that maybe the 50th anniversary of Star Wars might be an even bigger celebration than we even know. So a year and a half early for that, and we get the announcement already. So can't wait to hear about that. But of course, as always, these streams are run by your guys' questions, your comments, your theories, anything you'd like to discuss. So if you have something pressing you would like to mention in the chat room, feel free to do so. We have a few chats already lined up. It is first come, first serve. But if you do become a Patreon or YouTube member at a specific tier, you get priority chat access. If you send in a super chat, that always guarantees you to be answered on tonight's stream, as well as pretty much bumped up to the top. As soon as we finish what we're talking about, we'll answer your question. So those are ways you can support the channel and guarantee your chat to get on. We don't always get through everybody's chats if there are a lot, so make sure you send them in early or send them in via super chat or through Patreon YouTube memberships. Make sure you like the video if you haven't. We have a lot more people watching right now than have liked this stream, so make sure you like it if you have not. Comment below if you're watching on replay and let us know your thoughts. Make sure you join us every week. We go live about 7 p.m. Pacific time every single Tuesday. So if you are new, make sure you join us every week for that. We have discussed some possible changes. This show will stay the same, but we're hashing out kind of the future of our channel, and so um, we have even more live stuff we'd like to bring you in the future. And so if you guys want to keep supporting the channel and supporting our live content. If you're interested in that type of stuff, make sure you're joining us every week and you're hitting that like button, you're subscribing, because we have a lot of more plans for you guys in the future and hopefully some cool stuff coming your way. But yes, make sure you send in those chats. That will drive tonight's stream. And if you are on topic with your chats, we'll incorporate that in our discussion based on our two lead news stories. We do have a few other things in the world of rumors and leaks and information, small news stories we can talk about as well. If the conversation dies down, we'll be going about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on the flow of the conversation tonight. And without further ado, let's get into our first story, which is, of course, the deadline news that broke around 5 p.m. Pacific time. We just got this news that Starfighter has cast Matt Smith as its villain in the new Lucasfilm movie starring Ryan Gosling and Mia Goth, who we heard was cast last month or so in the film. This news is pretty much official. Matt Smith, as many of you might know, Doctor Who, House of the Dragon, Morbius. He's been around for a while now and kind of been a pop culture icon for a minute. And he was cast in Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. Many have debated what his role actually was. One of the most common theories was that he was playing a young Palpatine in the vein of Dark Empire. And as we know, we got the older clone Palpatine, the Ian McDermott Palpatine in The Rise of Skywalker as our main villain. But originally, it seems that maybe Matt Smith might have played a younger version of Palpatine. There's been also other rumors about some of his other roles that he could have played in the film, but ultimately, he was completely cut from the movie, not a part of it whatsoever, never even a part of the marketing really for the film. And so Matt Smith's Star Wars debut was halted, but now what will be 8 years later, 7.5 years later, he will be making his Star Wars debut with Star Wars Starfighter, where he's going to play the villain of the film. Sonic, you hear Matt Smith now cast as the villain of Starfighter. He's going to be in a movie with Ryan Gosling and Mia Goth, and this whole thing is just starting to really come together as they begin to approach their shooting dates, which is going to be about the end of the year, if I'm not mistaken, and they're going to get this thing off and running as it's coming out in May 2027. What are your thoughts on Matt Smith joining the Star Wars universe? I can't hear you. I think you might be muted. Okay, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I think it's been a um, so it's exciting. I'm not exactly sure. Okay, hopefully refresh resets that audio issue that we've been having. All right, sounds good now. But seems like it's getting okay. Clear here. I'm gonna pass it back to you, Liam. I will
Okay.
try to fix up what's going on my end here.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like mine is as staticky as well. Just stand by. Sorry about the technical difficulties, everybody. We're working through them right now. Um, not too much we can do with the audio messed up. So stand by, and we'll cut this out in the long run.
Uh, as we're saying that, it does seem like it's gotten better, which is very strange. Please
Okay,
let us know
great.
if it sounds clear to you guys. Okay. All right. All right. I guess I'll jump back into it. Sorry for the delay there, guys. We usually test this out right before too, and it sounded nice and clear. But, to answer your question after such a delay, Liam, I'm excited. He's a high caliber actor. Obviously, House of Dragons is probably the biggest profile thing that he's done. He's kinda stayed in the public consciousness in a meme way in the same way like Ryan Gosling has, as a Morbius, right? Like, he's kinda had a couple of things that have, like, let him, like, be around pop culture, not only to show his prowess as an actor, but to just continue his strong career, move past the whole Doctor Who role, which is obviously iconic for him. But if you were there when he was first announced, everybody was like, "No, we don't want a new Doctor, like, this is the first time we kinda wanna keep the same Doctor." He was the youngest Doctor at the time, and it took a while, but by the end, he became pretty beloved too, so now that so many years have passed, a decade plus, he has definitely proven his acting talent. He is stuck around for the long term. It's very exciting to have him here, And like Liam alluded to, 2019, he was supposedly cast for Rise of Skywalker, and I think he probably would have been in there. I know there's always a big rumor about like, "Oh, he's gonna be a clone for Ian McDiarmid, like, younger." Facially, I never bought it. They just don't really have anything remotely the same, but if you looked up, like, stuff, regarding this, especially now that it's kinda coming back up today with his casting now being announced here for Starfighter, he was kinda more technically, like, previewed in some early drafts as like a Sith King sort of character, which I think could have maybe alluded to like more of a presence for the Sith Eternal if we had gone the extra 6 months that Kathleen and JJ wanted. Obviously, we'd run up into COVID, but for the sake of the story, we probably would get an extra 15, 20 minutes of runtime. Probably do flesh out Exegol way more, connect the differences between the First Order, the Final Order. Yeah, I think he would've been sort of that character. I could've definitely seen him be someone who feels like, "Oh, I'm the heir to Palpatine. I'm the best of what the Sith Eternal has achieved through all of arcane magic, our combination with Sith, history and ancient texts, our technology, reviving our old master. He'll strike me down and take over," or something like that. He probably would think of something like that, but maybe we get something more akin to Dark Empire where he just fully possessed by Palpatine. There's no sense of him, like, taking the next step, like, being the heir, successor, right? I don't think Palpatine necessarily spins the same story that he tells to Rey, like, like, "I'll live through you. Once you strike me down, I'll be part of you. It'll be next step for us." Like, for him, his character for Matt Smith probably gets told something like, "Oh, you are like the final fruition of everything, and you're gonna be like what takes us to the next level. I can't survive, I can't sustain anymore." And then he probably just gets taken over. We probably get a lot more of like a dynamic physical fight between him as pseudo Palpatine, Rey, and everything that's going on with, Ben probably it's a little bit more than "oof" as his only, like, line, only dialogue as when he's redeemed. Um, but that's, again, all speculation on my end. I think this is exciting because, you're not really obligating him to be living up to some huge legacy. You get to kinda let him define the character, be his own guy. With the casting of Mia Goth, I think this could be, like, a very much an underworld. Mia Goth and him could be, like, bounty hunters. Maybe they're aligned with, like, some Force cult, like Dark Cult or something like that. But with the state of the galaxy, with how fractured it seems, it doesn't seem like we'll be moving into like a unified galaxy under like central government after everything that happens in Episode 9, after the failures of obviously the original trilogy crew and the Order there, the New Republic there, and everything. So I could see like Gosling's character transporting his nephew or the kid or whoever, and then these two villains are just kind of like hired hands to try to bring them down. I could see Matt Smith maybe being more of, like, the boss, and Mia Goth being more of, like, the villain that's on their tails. And then, he makes maybe, like, more of his appearances for, like, bigger scenes or where the Force is involved, just to, like, kind of pay homage to what his original role would have been in Star Wars. But yeah, I mean, this is good, and this is a film that definitely is gonna be buoyed by more of its actors and the reputation that they carry. Star Wars has always been driven by the scripts, been driven by the world building, but in the wake of, like, the whole streaming era kinda coming to an end here with the soft reboot of the Mandoverse and everything, you've kinda gotta go for a surefire bet, and Shawn Levy is a smart filmmaker. I won't ever say he's a groundbreaking filmmaker, but we know he can do action quite well from Stranger Things. He has a lot of fluidity jumping between genres, giving him, like, a good to great script and, with what he has and relying more on the actors, I think is a smart choice, especially with some of the stuff that, like, Daniel RPK and Snyder have been talking about, like, "Oh, this could just be part of, like, connecting to Rey's New Jedi Order by the end, by after they transport the kid to her academy, and all these films may or may not connect into, like, one event." Like, there's rumors about that stuff going on too, so why not just create dependable characters that people can align with in a post-sequel world, allow the sequel characters to slowly get reintroduced, like we've been talking about on all these streams, let them have roles that are like 10, 15 minutes that don't let them be determined by what happened in the sequels, but kind of feels like, oh, I'm glad that at least we know what they're building from, what were their next steps. And then once they kind of get more and more ingrained with the new characters that definitely stick, that are in people's minds more, yeah, then you can blend it all together. And because you've got these caliber of actors, you've got the legacy young upstarts that have now become established in their own right in Hollywood, you'll have a very stacked and talented cast for whatever you wanna do in the post-sequel era, so it just makes sense. I don't know if this is necessarily a template I want for every film, right? I'd like the new Jedi Order film to also still kinda go to the roots of Star Wars of having some younger cast members, some unknowns for sure, but it would definitely be cool to get at least a film knowing the strengths of the filmmaker to go with, like, "Hey, give him some good talented actors that have names, and let's see what he can do with," because we know his action and everything else is a lot more credible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is the type of project that needs the big names. We've talked about, Star Wars has never gone for big names in the films. You don't ever really get super high, top of their game actors. Even when we have had that, it's usually because Star Wars has turned them from either no names to famous stars or B-list, C-list actors into A-list actors like even like an Oscar Isaac and an Adam Driver. They weren't as popular as they are now when The Force Awakens came out. They were, in that up and coming tier of actors. They weren't Oscar Isaac and Adam Driver. And, obviously we have Harrison Ford, Natalie Portman, Liam Neeson. Those are kind of some of the only ones that were at the top of their game. Maybe Sam Jackson as well, but he doesn't have a big
Yeah.
role. We've had others, actors who have taken smaller roles who have had some acclaim in the past, but Star Wars, for its leads, doesn't usually do that. This is the type of movie that needs that. This is a movie called Starfighter. It's pretty generic. It's a movie that takes place, especially post sequel. So it has the baggage of that. If it's going to use any of that iconography, if it's going to use any, first order remnants and stormtroopers and stuff like that, it just has the baggage of dealing with the post sequels, being the first truly original Star Wars movie that's not based on any pre-existing property. Because even Rogue One, which you could argue was original, still so intertwined to the events of A New Hope that even though it had all new characters, it still needed A New Hope to really get off the ground, right? And so this is our first Star Wars film that is relying on something completely new. And so I think leading with stars, leading with iconic faces, leading with people who are tried and true makes a lot of sense. And it can really entice other actors to maybe jump into the Star Wars world if it's successful, right? I think that's another big thing about this type of move with, and Mia Goth and Matt Smith aren't necessarily, top A-list actors, but they're widely known by a lot of people. Their faces, and Matt Smith especially has been in so much pop culture that if he can make a stamp in Star Wars as well, and that's another notch on his pop culture resume. But just in general, I think a lot of people are scared about Star Wars right now. Actors, directors, writers, the vitriol around the sequels, the vitriol just in general in this fandom. It's not a place where you can come and be super creative and do your thing. People are going to pick you apart, right? And so when you have this type of creative team who's going to go in and hopefully deliver a movie that's really fun and really satisfying, I think that's that's more important than ever, right? Especially with a property like this. If we're trying to figure out what's the future of Star Wars film post sequels, now you've got Mandalorian, which is a recognizable IP. You could have those films, but you also need some new stuff. And if Starfighter is the thing that paves the way for the new stuff and the formula for how we do new stuff in Star Wars, I think they're on the right track with this. Like you were saying, the rumors around like kind of an interconnected little mini cinematic universes within Star Wars, I think that's the right idea. I mean, we've been kind of saying that for a long time. I've been on the train for the Mandalorian cinematic universe for a long time, just like get this going and make this basically a reboot of what you did with the TV universe. And no, you can't have a cinematic universe on TV because it's not in the cinema. So this would true Mandalorian and Grogu would be the start of a cinematic universe basically for the Mandalorian. I think they're going to redo a lot of the steps we've seen in the 3 seasons of that show and Ahsoka and Boba Fett and all that. They're going to rebuild. If this is the way they kind of rebuild the sequel era and then eventually raise New Jedi Order is now part of that, it's either a culmination film or it's the one that like reintroduces her fully into the fold, building the goodwill and building an interesting foundation around other characters, other actors in this time period. It makes a lot more sense, and then you can redeem the things you need to redeem later on. And we've talked about this in the past too, about why they should wait on the Ray movie. It just is something that doesn't make sense to put out right now with how much vitriol's around it. You want to build to that. And Starfighter seems to be that type of movie. I'm still cautiously optimistic for Starfighter, as I am with all Star Wars movies, until we get that next great one. But it is something that I think, even though it seems simple on paper, could end up being like the next Mandalorian season one, where it's something, yes, it's simple, but it's effectively done in a well told story that launches something bigger. And I'm hoping for that from this crew. And I know we've heard a lot about this being a standalone movie, or Ryan Gosling not being, a part of more Star Wars, or Shawn Levy, this is kind of his one off little deal. And that can be true now, but the goal of every blockbuster is eventually to make more. And so I think they would love it if Starfighter turned into a 2, 3 movies trilogy. If it became the face of another side of Star Wars, they're looking for a new face for the post sequel Star Wars. And if they're able to slowly redeem the rest of the sequel stuff through a new face, I think that can work. But Matt Smith as a villain is, I mean, we've seen him be so great in House of the Dragon as a villain. Uh, Pretty much every time he's been a villain, he's been awesome outside of Morbius. But even that gave us that dance scene, so that was worth it as well. But yeah, I'm loving this, and like somebody said in the comments, who said it, the fandom traveler said Matt Smith looks awesome in the Mohawk punk stuff in Caught Stealing. Yeah, he does, and I can't wait to
Yeah.
see what he does there. But he can disappear into characters. For somebody who's so famous and so iconic in pop culture, he can really disappear into characters. And so even if he were to like play an alien or something in this, I think he's just a fantastic person to cast as your villain in Star Wars, and cannot wait to see what he does. But what do you guys think? Let us know in the chat. We'll bring up some of your points right now, and make sure you keep sending them in to the chat. We've got Anthony Tiff, who says Matt Smith's cast as a new villain, quite a surprise. I'd love to see him play a younger Palpatine. Uh, and then you ask another question about Palpatine. We'll get to that right after. But as for the Palpatine point, I mean, I was always very interested in seeing him, whether he looks like Ian McDiarmid or not. I think the gravitas of this type of actor would have been really interesting as a younger Palpatine. Every day that goes on, it's harder and harder to make him younger Palpatine if we were to do, a Plagueis show or something like that. But I still think Palpatine's not, for the majority of that story, Palpatine's probably in his 30s and his 40s. So he's not super young. You could still have Matt Smith do that, but it would be interesting that, like you were saying, Sonic, if he wasn't Palpatine in Rise of Skywalker originally, it'd be interesting if, like, pretty much a similar role, if he was connected to the Sith Eternal, came back into the fold here. Because I think if this movie's going to take place right after, a year after the Rise of Skywalker, you have to deal with some aftermath stuff from that. It would be a mistake for the lore. It would make more sense for business to just ignore the sequels, but I feel like it'd be a mistake for lore to not acknowledge in some capacity the fact that there was just a gigantic war that just ended, remnants of the Sith fleet and the Sith Eternal from Exegol, this hidden fleet that might, still exist. Do they play a role? Remnants of the First Order, which had at that point in the Rise of Skywalker conquered about half the galaxy. They were pretty much on their way to controlling everything by the time we get to the Rise of Skywalker. Those things just don't vanish in a year. And so I think it makes sense to really deal with some of that. If he came back in that type of role, I think that would be cool. But regardless, with the rumors around Gosling being a force sensitive, with the rumors around him, protecting a force sensitive kid, there's been speculation, could he be a Corran Horn? Could this connect to the EU at large? Could Gosling be a character who ends up becoming part of Rey's New Jedi Order, in the vein of some of the characters we see who are force sensitive in the EU eventually join Luke's Jedi Order? If they do all that, I think Matt Smith being a force sensitive villain would be really, really cool as well. And I think he would be just awesome as some type of maniacal, evil, dark side character. But we will see. I mean, I feel like based on the time period and Starfighter itself, odds are it's more like a pirate, or and we talked about Mia Goth possibly being a pirate, I believe, before in her casting. Maybe a pirate, or maybe some type of other type of scoundrel or crime lord, something like that could make sense for him as well, but it would feel like a little bit of a missed opportunity not getting to see him ham it up in that, like, really deliciously evil, like, British Shakespearean actor sort of way.
Uh, yeah, I don't know. I want the connections, like you said, and I think they will be smarter about it. Like you said, this is soft reboots in every sense of the word. This is a whole new era for Star Wars. But I don't know. I think they're more willing to soft reboot they're doing with the Mandoverse and have connections because it's like, yeah, you want that familiarity. You want to like reference things. So you're like, oh, it wasn't just a waste. Like streaming era is not just like done with. Like it's still an integral part to the story of so many franchises now, right? Not just Star Wars, Marvel and all that. And we've seen like very mixed results with everybody who's kind of done spin-offs, who's kind of done other things. And we know that it's not gonna be a clean thing transition to get back into movies and, like, rebalance TV shows being TV shows again, but in the case of Star Wars with a guy in Favreau who never did a TV show before and his first show was The Mandalorian and, expectation it'd be a good show, but not like a global freaking phenomenon like it did. Like, they wanted me like, "Yeah, I wanna connect all the dots here." Will they do the same with the sequels? And do they have to, right? Like, this is not necessarily a situation where we are in 2013 when Michael Arndt's draft for The Force Awakens is kinda redone and everything, and you get JJ on board, and at that point, he's definitely known and very publicly a big prequel hater, talking about like, "Oh, we hid Jar Jar's bones on Jakku here," and all stuff like that, right? Like, that whole era of the requel era, you kinda do the story again, and you'd, like, take familiar elements, but you would never connect it, right? I don't think we're gonna necessarily run into that situation again, but we also don't have a lot for 9 to go off. It is a blank slate. The Force Awakens has the prequels, like, the legacy of it as mixed as they were, especially back then, but it's still falling after Episode 6. So you could kinda get away with a lot of it because a prequel trilogy, it's a totally different thing. But now it's like, okay, well, this is a direct continuation. What does that mean? And is there anything to really continue? Right? Like, it's like there's a little bit of a balancing act. I don't think they'll truly abandon the idea of connecting stuff. I want the whole Sith King thing to actually be played out here. This would be cool. I want to know more about the Sith Eternal. I want to know the state of like the Final Order versus the First Order stragglers and how a New Republic or whatever different factions pop up are, like, accepting or not accepting of the 2 different groups of, like, people turning and all that, like, there's so much there, just intrinsically that's political, that is culturally reshaping and redefining, right? It's a whole group of 2 different groups that are outside of the main galaxy who are on unknown regions, who are in the red cluster zone, right? Like, they're not people who are denizens of the galaxy. That alone is really interesting to see how they would connect even, like, the normal ones. If you bring the Sith King concept back, then let him play it, ham it up, right? Yeah, I would love that. If it's Palpatine clone-ish, I don't know if I'd love that, but if you get the Sith Eternal to, like, actually say something instead of just chanting in the background, yeah, that'd be fascinating, and you don't need to have a lot of them, right? The books and stuff can do all the fleshing out, but if you have a representative and, Matt Smith of like, "Oh, I was supposed to be the failsafe. I was supposed to be there for Palpatine, and things just didn't happen," right? Like, "Oh, okay, there's your connection to Episode 9." Lets you kinda retcon a little bit of your like, how you look at that final battle, and then you get to still have this original cast here and a whole different scale and a whole different scope. Definitely seemingly more Starfighter, space-based, more of a run and hide sort of situation as opposed to, like, come to my home and destroy everything and witness all the darkness that is here, right? So, a lot of stuff that could be fun there. I think Hollywood right now has learned to avoid, like, requel, like, ignore details, especially with how everything kinda happened with, like, the Jurassic Park franchise, with Star Wars, with Star Trek to a degree. We'll have connections, definitely will have connections. But how much is gonna be necessary? I don't know. Like, if Matt Smith truly is Sith Eternal, that's the only thing you gotta hone in on. You don't have to say anything about Finn. You don't have to say anything about Rey until the very end, or like the heroes say more of like the mythical presence that she's been cultivating with her academy, or like if it even is a real thing, right? Maybe they're just chasing after some sort of urban myth that's kind of popped up in a year or two amongst all these different parts of the galaxy, right? You don't have to really directly connected threads there. You can kind of vaguely be like, "This kinda seems familiar," and it works out because that'll actually service the characters here. It's not the same as The Force Awakens where you wish there was direct references other than like, "Oh, a clone army," like, between Hux and Kylo, like, "No, I wanna know way more about the New Republic. What were its failings? What were its differences? Like, why is all that stuff that is crucial to the world building missing there?" I think the world building is a necessity for Starfighter to handle, but they don't have to go on every single plot point. You can just be like, "Let's just focus on the ending of 9, what you remember that was visually cool, flesh it out, and bam." If that works, you can go a little more ambitious for the next film, or you can do the same thing again in a totally different arena, and then combine it all together with an event film and stuff like that. I don't want things to necessarily all be MCU, like, connectors or, like, here's a couple films and then bam, it's an event film. But Star Wars kinda did that with books back in the '90s with, like, New Jedi Order. It referenced so many things in the Bantam era. It was basically them soft rebooting the Bantam era and, like, not a lot of this makes sense. We'll take the best parts and connect those details. Oh, this trilogy can reference and be connected to these books. Star Wars has done it, and it's done it quite right before. Just the general trend in Hollywood in the late 2000s, and a director who just did not have any sense of really caring for the prequels and the connectivity to lore kinda stopped us from seeing that be well repeated, even though the brand was probably the best suited out of all franchises to really take what worked in the books forward to the visual medium. Hopefully,
Mhm.
now everybody's learned their lesson, but, to be determined.
Well, yeah, that's true, but I think it just, it'll be interesting to see what the trends in Hollywood play into for this, like you're mentioning the requel thing, but, like, we're starting to see now back-to-back films with Superman, Fantastic Four
Yeah.
that ignore origins and just say, "Let's jump into story." Star Wars started that. Star Wars started that with,
Yeah.
the opening crawl, like, that was a thing Star Wars does, but we have had such big time jumps and different, time periods and stories. How do we handle that with this? Do we see the crawl come back? Do we see us just jump into the events? Is this really build as that start of the next thing? Because I'm kind of with you. Like the MCU thing, I think it works great for a story like the Mandalorian universe with a central big villain who's iconic amongst Star Wars fans, as is Thrawn, right? But you still have the iconography of the stormtroopers. You still have like all of that type of stuff. And Star Wars hasn't yet really done a live action cinematic universe like that. So I think it makes sense to do it that way. But when you do a lot of different cinematic universes, how do you convince people this one's different from another one if it's within the same franchise? Also, does the cinematic universe now become we kind of abandoned it for a little bit in the early 2020s because of COVID and stuff like that. We started to see box office for cinematic universe and really towards the late 2010s, you were seeing a lot of failed cinematic universes get going. There was the monster universe with
Oh, boy.
Universal. There were a bunch of like books being adapted that were trying to be made into cinematic universes. There were a bunch of things that tried and failed, and it really did seem like probably by 2017, 2018, Hollywood basically accepted we're not going to be Marvel and we're not going to do a cinematic universe. That's their thing. Does that come back? Because right now, studios are searching for guaranteed box office, right? And we've seen that nothing's a guarantee in today's world because the quality has been so inconsistent. You can only guarantee box office when you have consistent high quality and excitement and anticipation. And they just haven't been able to build that excitement and anticipation because the quality has been so underwhelming. So I think before you put the cart before the horse and you start a cinematic universe in a time period that is extremely, extremely controversial right off the bat, you have to be darn certain that this is going to work. And so, like I always say, plan it, have it written, have ideas, have outlines, be ready to go if Starfighter comes out day one and makes $150 million opening weekend and is like a huge, massive hit and has 95% on Rotten Tomatoes and everybody's excited about it. Be ready, but you can't get going on a cinematic universe yet without knowing that people actually want that because then you continue to damage the brand if it's not good and you continue to lose your audience if people are not interested. And so that's something that'll be interesting to see what they do as Hollywood continues to search for the next trend. And we saw Fantastic Four kind of took up a big hit its second weekend, it didn't continue. It shows that Marvel movies right now for a lot of people are just a one-time watch, even if they're interested in one, even if one's good, they're not going back. And I think that's generally a little bit more to do with the fact that there's nothing in Marvel movies right now that is getting you excited for the next one to where you feel like, oh, I got to go back and catch this Easter egg I missed. Because right now there's really no plot line to follow that you can actually like look from point A to point B and be like, I got to see it again because somebody pointed out this Easter egg and I missed it. So I think it's an anticipation problem for them right now. But for Star Wars, hopefully they don't put all their chips in one basket, because there can be exciting, good movies like Starfighter that just can be a fun little homage to the early days of, dogfighting in Star Wars, the 90s stories, that type of thing, without being connected to all these things. And as much as us as fans, especially us hardcore fans who are watching the stream and who are talking about Star Wars weekly, we want to see all these things connect. They've got to figure out the best possible strategy for themselves. And so while I would love to see it, we just got to hope and make sure that this is great too. And it'll be interesting to see how Hollywood trends play, because we're really in a flux period right now. Next year will show, I think, the true face of what the new trends in Hollywood are, as the DC universe gets kicked off, as Star Wars relaunches in theaters, as Avengers gets going, and it's, the MCU's got its new big crux point into its next story, whatever that ends up being in 2028. We have a lot of things changing about the franchises that shape movie going right now, and 2026 is as big of a year as any to really solidify all that for the moviegoer and for the studios moving into the future. But yeah, any more questions or comments about Matt Smith? We have Skywalker's Academy says, "Why does everyone want Matt Smith to be a younger Palpatine? Can't he be a new villain?" Yeah, and I think the chances are basically zero that he's a younger Palpatine, Skywalker's Academy. So don't worry too much about that. I think everybody just wanted to see him maybe be that in, or wonders what the what if was in the Rise of Skywalker. If he were to have been young Palpatine and we didn't get the Ian McDiarmid version, or we got both versions and we got some type of adaptation of Dark Empire a little bit more closely than the version we got in Rise of Skywalker. But he still could be like, I mean, obviously, if he's not Palpatine in this, it basically kills the fact that he can play young Palpatine in the Plagueis show or movie or whatever, the Palpatine origin story. Unless he's an alien. If he's an alien in this and he's in, a costume or mocap or whatever, he can come back and play Palpatine. But I think a lot of people just have that idea in their head from the rumors of the Rise of Skywalker, and they want to see it or want to see the what if. But I think it's pretty much a zero. He's Palpatine in this movie.
Yeah, I again, it's just because Palpatine was brought back, and you're like, okay, was this like them like expanding Ian's role? Like, was he supposed to just be more like a ghastly presence and then kind of give away to this guy for the final battle? And then like, you're like, "Oh, it doesn't really work." You want Ian to have, like, the final moments here, right? How do you do that visually? It's pretty silly in Dark Empire too, like, when he's just a ghastly specter, like, trying to take over Anakin Solo, just hopping between bodies, right? And at least there you have the chance of it being like, "Oh, you can still see the younger Palpatine." It's all comic art, you don't it's not really, like, stuck in, like, on a visual the same way, like, reality is. But yeah, I mean, I can get why, and it sucks to say, but everything being so IP driven, Star Wars kind of being like the first real IP when it comes to filmmaking, you don't wanna let go of things that are, are guarantees, especially with the state of cinema now. So people are kind of attuned to that. People are kinda expecting that. So it was also like, yeah, maybe they didn't have enough time in their runtime to really make it work. Maybe they just didn't think it was working out, and maybe they just were like, "That's not what people are gonna show up for anyways," right? You can't really market a Matt Smith here and kinda, like, steal the thunder at the very end there because you need to have a physical embodiment, right? All these things put there, right, like, I can understand that, but again, he facially just doesn't look anything like Palpatine, and the older he gets, the more his face becomes even more structured and defined in a way that Ian's really has never been. Like, he has very high cheekbones, the hairline's totally different. He's just got, like, a very stark face, and in his youth never was like that. He's kind of plays very well, like, even though he's an older man when the prequels came out, he played very well into, like, the senatorial kinda softer image and, like, a little bit plot posh, living a little bit of a plump lifestyle on Naboo, and that worked to his favor with when he eventually becomes more the gaunt looking, drained body that obviously is a younger version of him, but that kinda plays into, like, the dark side corrupting, cancer, it takes away everything from you. I just don't see that at all with Matt Smith. He just becomes more and more stoic and, like, a statuesque kind of figure as he gets older. It'd be hard to sell that prosthetics, CGI, whatever you wanna use, and I think that's just unnecessary. So, like we were talking about, and when we first introduced the story, I think it'd be nice to connect those, to get that compromise connected to Palpatine, but not be Palpatine, like, build out that concept that might have been at play originally so that people can be like, "Oh, yeah, I remember, all those kinda chanting faces in the background. Maybe this was, like, plan B," and Palpatine, just like in Return of the Jedi, was just super arrogant about everything kinda going on here, right? And then you can kinda play it out. What does a plan B do when there is no more plan A, there is no more structure on it, right? That can be really cool. The possibilities for, like, a very structured, scheduled evil now kinda being let loose on the galaxy when everything's kinda fractured, when everybody's in a free for all. Yeah, again, it's a nice connected thread, but it's a completely open book now.
Fandom Traveler will get the last word on this. It says, I'm trying to avoid most Star Wars news and trailers. The title Starfighter gives off sci fi versus the space fantasy vibes I love in Star Wars. Please don't suck. Yeah, I'm with you on that last point. But I think let's talk about this too in one specific way as well with Star Wars Starfighter. So we know Starfighter was announced officially in April, but it's been rumored for a while. Now, to me, Starfighter, the thing it most kind of resembles in the way we're hearing about it and like that it might be a little bit different and it has obviously a brand new cast of characters and stuff like that is Skeleton Crew. And Skeleton Crew was not a big hit on Disney Plus. It was pretty good. Most people think it's underrated. And I think once people get around to watching it, they're all gonna find something pleasant to enjoy with that. Like very much so exceeds your expectations if you have, you know, a real disdain for Star Wars currently on Disney Plus, and if you think it's going to be the greatest thing ever, then it's not going to exceed your expectations. But like the fandom traveler brings up a good point because that is kind of classically, built into genre, right? It's classically sci-fi. It has like a lot of classic, like 50s sci-fi tropes and aesthetics to me, and it also plays off of the 80s style storytelling from, the Amblin films and from stuff from Richard Donner and Steven Spielberg and all that. So you have something that's very steeped in classic sci-fi, but also in genre. And Starfighter, even though we know nothing really about it, only from leaks and rumors, it that title itself just kind of invokes that already, like you're saying, Fandom Traveler. And I wonder if maybe some of the original ideas from Shawn Levy got changed up a little bit to maybe incorporate a little bit more of either the Force or larger connections to the Star Wars world or lore, and especially when big actors started coming on board because of something like Skeleton Crew flopping so hard on Disney Plus when it was actually good. Are they concerned and worried about something like this flopping, hence the need for big actors and big names? Because it might not be, universe altering or galaxy spanning or galactically important. Maybe it's just a fun movie about a guy and a kid on the run being chased by people and they happen to be force sensitive. It's probably that, but does Lucasfilm feel the need to now say, "Hey, we've on the times we've tried to do something that's a little bit more under the radar, on the times we've tried to do something that's not as galaxy spanning or as important to Star Wars lore, nobody's really watched it." Do they feel the need now to insert stuff that might connect it more to the sequels? Do they feel the need to insert stuff that starts the sequel redemption project? Do they feel the need to insert stuff that starts the next Jedi Sith conflict or Jedi dark side conflict for the future post sequels? That's where my only concern comes in. But this thing seems to be moving so smoothly and so quickly that I don't think there's too much meddling. But did before all this process start, did some of the script ideas originally change because of things like a Skeleton Crew flopping? That's where I'm wondering, and how much of this, like, original Starfighter idea, like, the genre stuff of, like, classic '50s inspired Flash Gordon-esque sci-fi that inspired the original Star Wars movies, it seems to be in that kind of title, that one-word title. Does some of that fade away a little bit more for galactic stuff? I'm interested in that, but Sonic, what do you think? Do you think, now Starfighter is kinda altering with all these big cast announcements? Do you think it's starting to become something a little bit bigger than maybe it was originally intended to be?
Timing wise, for sure. I mean, at one point we're thinking New Jedi Order comes out, then rumors of Mangle's gone at the Jedi, right? And with the 2023 slate with New Jedi Order, with Ahsoka, with Dawn of the Jedi, it seemed like we're gonna have a whole force push, like the esoteric stuff. And we've gotten some recent like reports showing like how long audiences were staying for like different shows. Like again, Andor season 1 to season 2, it's hard to really compare because the release schedule and everything is crazier, but it did jump. It did grow from the end of season 1 onwards. Ahsoka, 32% drop, for example, from episode 1 to 8, which, I think is a bit crazy. I understand not liking the last 2 episodes, but it's a season 1 of a Filoni show. I think people should give him the benefit of the doubt at this point. Again, he's never really had just a 2-season show, which is what Ahsoka's kinda shaping up to be, so that, could add a different wrinkle. But, like, I think timing of it, everything being reshuffled, Kinberg kinda working on possibly 10 to 12 or maybe working on, like, all these different ideas and kinda incorporating them into, like, an event film or something. There's a lot to be juggled here, right? And I can see Starfighter being expanded out to just be like, "Yeah, we need to appeal to everybody." This is gonna be, like, probably the most general audience Star Wars film that we're gonna have in a while. Like, I know Mandalorian Grogu will have its fans, but you could argue that it's not really a general audience film anymore. It's a reboot of something that peaked in 21, 22, right? Where by the time it comes out, it's gonna be almost a half decade since people were, like, super invested in it. And I'm not saying that it won't do well, but I don't think they're expecting $1 billion from it. I think they're hoping for more like 600, $700, right? Like, and especially with it being like a Star Trek film from the '90s, where like the original trilogy, original series cast would just take redressed Next Generation sets and just be like, "Yep, bro, just change some colors, add a couple extra buttons here, make it look a little older. Bam, here we go. Now this is what's happening." And on the big screen, while all this stuff is happening on the small screen, this we've got all the technology for Mandalorian Grogu. It's not gonna be, like, fresh and new 100%. It's gonna be what you've seen just brought cinematically. So, yeah, I think with this being like, "No, this is a completely new thing. This is post-sequel era," like, what does that imply? What does that mean? What are the things that need to be corrected? Are we gonna requel this whole thing? Are we gonna reboot it? Are we gonna directly continue it? Can we directly continue it? It's just gonna be a one-off. So many of these questions juggling around, I'm sure they had to, like, kind of draw away from just Starfighter being those pulpy kind of, like, vibes that you're expecting from 50s sci-fi. And Starfighter always has an extra connotation too with Star Wars because there's so many Star Wars video games with X-Wings and, there's obviously the Rogue Squadron, Wraith Squadron books. We've seen Alphabet Squadron canon, like, dogfighting is core to Star Wars. It's been there from the very beginning. A singular starfighter, what does that mean? Is it, like, on the run? Are we gonna run into battles? Like, all these different things, and maybe when it was pitched, you're running into, like, different things that are happening around the galaxy as a way to touch on a little bit more of the era, but how does your villains, like, hold up in there? You can't it's a Baron Soontir Phil is super cool when you get to explore his character and, like, see his personality, the way he operates versus a Wedge when you can get into both their headspaces. Visually, it's not as, appealing when you put it on a TV show or a movie, right? And I think that has been a challenge with, like, a Rogue Squadron getting on the screens. How do you make that super appealing and, like, cinematic while also being a lower budget and smaller cast, tighter, and being smart about filmmaking when blockbusters are not really just working off of IPs anymore? It's a very tough situation, so I think they have expanded it probably on the villain side more than anything else. The original concept to me kinda sounded like how we thought about Mandalorian and Grogu, and the Lone Wolf and the Cub. It is just that basically, and, and they can do, like, their little bounties and little missions together, but it's not like a groundbreaking change. It's a Star Wars skin on there. They probably wanna do the same thing here when Shawn Levy's was, like, the 4th or 5th up. Now that it's like, this is the first real test, the brand on something original, on something new. They're like, "Oh, you have to go on the 4 quadrants. You have to appeal to everybody. You have to appeal to the general audience and what they're expecting from Star Wars." If we don't see a lightsaber in this film, I'd be shocked, like, well before a Rey appearance, I'm expecting something, like, from the villain's side, like, and that's where the Sith Eternal angle with Matt Smith, it does definitely pop up, and you're like, "Oh, this could be really interesting." And again, I like the idea that this could be something like that because it appeals to the diehards of Star Wars who've gone through all these ups and downs, who wanna see what have you learned from 2014, 2015 when we first had, like, a chance to restart everything. This is your second restart in a general sense, but are you gonna, like, just ignore all the stuff that we did like, that we wanna see connected, wanna see fleshed out? So this appeals to everybody, I think, and I think this is a smart move. But does it take away from the pulpier kinda space fantasy that we're hoping for? Yes, but I wasn't really expecting that anyway when you have to look at the sequels as, like, a more modern 2010s era of Star Wars, where the original trilogy is the '70s and '80s, and the prequels are the '50s and early '60s, right? Like, it was kinda bound to happen. Your expectations are gonna change. This is the 2020s or, like, the early 2020s of Star Wars are happening timeline-wise if you're gonna compare it to reality now. That pulpier stuff doesn't work as much.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that I think I think homage in general is coming back. Like I think Superman's indicative of the fact that people like joyful, fun movies. It
Yeah,
doesn't have to be something that's like always gonna change the world. But the ones that, Disney has thrived off of for so long, those billion-dollar movies, a movie like Starfighter might not be that without those other things. So I think it's an interesting line to, go for the approach of putting out some smaller movies like a Starfighter might have originally been conceived in just hopes of winning back the audience and hope that it's your second big hit after Mandalorian and Grogu. And then by the time you maybe do a Starfighter 2, it can be the face of a new franchise. Or do you try to kickstart that off right off the bat? I mean, we've seen different philosophies work in different ways. But yeah, that's our story for that one. Continue to let us know what you think about Matt Smith joining Starfighter and what you just think about Starfighter in general. Are you excited for Starfighter? Is it something that you're just kind of waiting to see what the marketing's like and what the story is actually about before you get too interested? Let us know all of that in the chat and in the comments if you're watching on replay. We're going to continue with our second story here and then move pretty much exclusively to the chat. So continue firing in your questions, your comments, anything you'd like to discuss. And then this story will be a lot more brief than the Matt Smith news, but it is going to be that Star Wars is coming back to theaters in 2027 for its 50th anniversary. Now, this shocks pretty much nobody because we have seen every Star Wars movie that's had some type of anniversary, really, except for Attack of the Clones, come back in theaters since 2020, since we started, the phase of re-releases and studios seeing how much money they can make via these big re-releases in theaters. This huge wave has just dominated, and rightfully so. I mean, I think this is something that if they continue to do it the way they're doing it, is not only great for movie theaters and for fans, but it's good for business all the way around. I think it makes everybody happy. You don't have to go if you don't want to. If you want to see your favorite movie in theaters, especially something like this that hasn't been in theaters since 1997, then this is your opportunity. They can overdo it to the point where nobody starts going, but Revenge of the Sith was so awesome this year in theaters. First time it's been in theaters in a wide release in 20 years. And it showed it made so much money. And they made a huge mistake by not leaving it in theaters for more than a week because they would have made a lot of money on Star Wars Day with that. But they decided to pull it in case it competed with Thunderbolts. I think now seeing the box office for Thunderbolts in the long run, I think they made a mistake there. I think they're probably regretting doing that massive success already. But we got this announcement, and to me, this was super random because one, it's not shocking whatsoever that this is coming for the 50th anniversary, and two, if those of you who know your Star Wars dates know, Star Wars' 50th anniversary isn't for over a year and a half. It's 2027. We're in 2025. So the announcement of this just is kind of strange, to say the least. But we did get the announcement that Star Wars Celebration was coming to LA. in 2027 to celebrate its 50th. Maybe with this film being released, maybe it's going to be a little bit longer run for this movie or a little bit more. Maybe they're just trying to use it as a bit of a lead in to Starfighter, maybe show some exclusive clip or something before the movie that ties into Starfighter because that will be coming out the same year. I think they're going to be using it really as a marketing ploy for that. But even Starfighter, even though we're finding out news about it, there's nothing official. It hasn't started filming. This is just a very strange time to announce this information. But the movie will come out April 30th for those of you who want to mark your calendars 2 years in advance. We will see that movie come out April 30th. Now, the question that will be on everybody's mind is this the theatrical cut? Is this the special edition? Which one are we going to get? And will they do both? Will they do, a week of theatrical, a week of special edition? I think that'll be the most interesting thing. And if it was confirmed to be theatrical, that would make a little bit more sense why they'd start building the hype now. But alas, I am just kind of baffled by the announcement of this, but excited for Star Wars 15 nonetheless. Sonic, what are your thoughts on the announcement a year and a half early that Star Wars is coming back to theaters in 2027?
Yeah, I mean, I almost forgot that, yeah, it's not till 2027, we're in 2025. Like, if it was 2026, I can almost kinda understand it.
Yeah.
I know we don't have a celebration next year, right? I think we're waiting till 2027 as well, or something like that, so I can understand, like, kinda dropping it a little earlier, just be like, "Okay, here's how the branding is gonna look and all that." But based off of, like, what Eckhart's Ladder has been talking about, how he kinda got some, like, leaked restoration, of what they're doing, like, this is a full, like, big budget restoration of the theatrical that's supposedly happening. I'm not surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if they're kinda doing, like, the DC Studios route where they had, like, the Superman documentary for Christopher Reeves, kinda, like, building up, like, the hype around the character, kinda building off of, like, just, like, what people were thinking and doing, like, on TikToks and all that with, like, "I want an optimistic Superman. I wanna know what that means again. Let's go back to the original vibes," and all that, and kind of piggybacking off of that. Star Wars obviously has the landmark date, but I do think we are maybe in line to at least I think we'll still get the main version that we see on Disney Plus in theaters. I don't think I could, have it in me to stop all of us diehard McClunky fans from missing out on seeing that little extra scene that's been added in, the most confusing shootout. And I do believe it was, like, stipulated that Disney can't change, like, the canon, uh, George Lucas has provided in the films. Again, he doesn't really have final say anymore, so I don't know how long they'll really hold to that. But I could definitely see this be because they're doing a documentary, they're doing a full restoration for, like, a home release or streaming, just to let people have that option, be like, "Oh, this is something really cool," and then they might make it, like, almost like, come to these specific almost like do, like, roadshow films or, like, come here in these weeks leading into the anniversary or, like, after May 25th, these weeks, it'll be in these towns, these weeks will be like that. Make it so it's like, oh, like, you have to go out of your way to kinda see it, whereas you can still see a really nicely polished version, maybe an upgrade on what we've gotten from the Steelbooks and from Disney Plus, another grade up from that, and be like, "Okay, here's our latest versions of the original trilogy, our latest cleanup job." But we thought because it's the 50th, we wanna, like, make it like a whole rollout so you can see the original as close as possible to what it was in '77. You can see a documentary, you can see panels coming about, maybe documentaries on different actors, what's going on with George Lucas's museum and everything, kinda just tying into, like, this is it, like, pop culture really as we know it today, it started off with this film. Let's make this, like, the biggest slow-moving push towards, like, a full celebration of it, so I don't know how true Eckhart's Ladder is, he's kinda doubled down in a recent video too. He's saying, like, the grain looks very similar to, like, how it was in the '70s. It seems like they're redoing certain shots, swapping out some audio from previous takes that they found that are a little cleaner. Because if you do listen even to the most, like, recent version of A New Hope, it's not the cleanest audio takes, it's not the stuff that can be upgraded 100% cleanly even with AI. If they found something that's a lot cleaner, that's more professional grade, swapping that out, like, they're trying to make this as close as possible to '77, but also, like, the ideal version of 77. Like if they had all the pieces in play, if they didn't have the fact that it was an $11 million film over budget, George Lucas was escaping to Hawaii because he don't want to deal with the opening weekend being a disaster for him and then suddenly everything going right. So it's exciting, definitely exciting. I think that's why it's been this early because I think they're going to make a huge push. And with Starfighter coming out in 2077, with Star Wars hopefully having a good year in theaters next year in its return, it just kinda makes sense to be like, you know, we're gonna honor a lot of the vibes of that original film too in Starfighter, and we want you guys to just feel like, "I'm so excited to watch, at least those 3 movies, and then what's next for Star Wars," even if you're not super interested in the sequels, super interested in the prequels, super interested in the Disney Plus stuff.
Yeah, I don't want to poo-poo the excitement of this because I'm very excited for this, and I can't wait to see it regardless of which version it is. Sonic and I did the whole Star Wars marathon a few years ago, so now we've both seen every Star Wars movie in the theaters. But for the longest time for me, this was one of two with Attack of the Clones that I had not seen in theaters, and then I got to see this actually in 2022 in theaters in a screening just in near my hometown that decided to show it. But as in terms of official wide release for A New Hope, this has been on the bucket list for a lot of Star Wars fans for a very long time. And so, and at that point, it will be 30 years since it was last in theaters. So I think that's pretty cool. As for the logo itself and stuff too, I really love it. It reminds me of the special editions logo that they put on pretty much every VHS and DVD box set for this film. I like the way the 50 looks. The gold tinting is very much so early 2000s Star Wars vibes. So all of that's great. I just am purely as like a fan or a person of like wondering what their overall end game is with every announcement, because like no company, no movie studio, no one, releases a press release, social media statement announcing something without some type of end game. And it doesn't make sense why you would do this and get the hype going for this a year and a half early, because now when you announce it, again in March of 2027, everybody's gonna be like, yeah, we knew this was coming because you announced it almost 2 years ago. So what's their purpose now, and how do we get why are they starting to advertise this already? I know that Disney is a fan of their like year to year and a half long celebrations of anniversaries. I mean, if you're a Disney Parks fan, you know that they usually start the celebration for any type of 5-year anniversary in May or so of the year of the actual anniversary, and then they continue it for basically a full year until about the next March, April, May. So but that makes sense because it's a theme park and not everybody can go, for on the same week that they might be celebrating the actual birthday, right? This is something coming back in the theater. So I'm just still a little baffled by what their plan is and what this is for. But I would love it if we start to hear more and more about how they're going to really make, with 2026 being such a huge year to relaunch Star Wars in theaters, with the streaming era of Star Wars now up for question. We don't really know anything that's coming to Star Wars streaming outside of Ahsoka season 2, at least in terms of live action stuff. Star Wars animation's restarting next year with Maul. We've got Star Wars jumping into anime next year. Star Wars books is going to need a reset here soon with High Republic now ending. With 2026 really being kind of this reboot year for Star Wars, does the celebration of the 50th kind of start in 2026 and then carry basically up to and through celebration, through the re-release of this, and culminate with Starfighter? That'll be interesting to see how they kind of sell all this. But I just looking at how they're selling this, I'm just wondering why. But very excited nonetheless. But now we're going to turn it over to your guys' questions. We've gone for about an hour tonight, and we go usually for an hour and a half to 2 hours. So we're going to take your guys' questions, your comments, anything you'd like to send into the chat right now for the remainder of the stream. We have a few other small things we can talk about in terms of news if the conversation runs dry, but we're going to focus on your guys' chats. If you'd like to support the channel, make sure you do so by hitting the like button. Really helps us out. More people watching right now than have liked the video, and subscribing to the channel. If you'd like to contribute to the channel financially, super chat is always greatly appreciated. Bumps your question up to the top. You can also join Patreon or YouTube membership programs that do have exclusive perks for live streams and for other great content via those programs. All right, let's scroll back up to the top. Who We start with Anthony Tiff, who says, speaking of Palpatine, I recently read the Secrets of the Sith book where Palpatine is the narrator. It's him essentially talking about the history of the Sith and his plans for the galaxy. He is writing right before episode 9 begins. It is cool to have something written from Palpatine's perspective, something we rarely get. Palpatine's lines in the beginning about how the darkness is eternal, again, also is Palpatine in episode 9 more of an entity than a real person. Okay, wait, is that a second? I think that's a second question. Um, as for Palpatine, the Secrets of the Sith, yeah, it's a really cool book, and it's always cool to have Palpatine perspective. Darth Plagueis is one of the few times we get long Palpatine perspective in story. But as for Secrets of the Sith being more, it's more of like a biography, not necessarily a biography, but it's more like it's a history book, like kind of how we've seen recently. Star Wars has done a lot of these history books, and so it's a little bit more factual and a little bit less story. So it's a really cool one. Definitely check it out if you haven't. Glad you enjoyed it, Anthony. And yeah, definitely if you haven't read Darth Plagueis and you want some actual Palpatine story perspective, that's your place to get it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's nice getting these little kinda, like, source books, history books. Um, yeah, obviously, they oftentimes do get sort of retcon, like, at least the guidebooks, the visual guidebooks have been retconned every era of Star Wars, but these ones are interesting because they're vague enough that you can be like, "Oh, obviously he doesn't know," or like you said here, being set before episode 9, he doesn't know about the folly of what he's about to do. He doesn't know that he's about to be defeated here, right? So it's really cool to see, like, him be, like, a history narrator, but also be like, "But this will be, like, my victory. This will be my, choice of making the galaxy be under my grasp of the eternal darkness," right? So, I like these books. I know they did one with, like, Luke sort of as the lead of sorts, but, I it's just never been something that's, like, been super appealing to me. I've always been more driven to, like, lore story, like, "Hey, this is it stands on its own, it's got third person POVs." These kind of books, it's like, it's cool to see the art and reference some, like, interesting details, but I never really take them, like, truly at face value because 'cause they're always vaguely on purpose to be super unintentional about what they wanna be saying. Because how long is it gonna last?
Anthony then says, is Palpatine in episode 9 more of an entity than a real person? Yes. Well, he's a spirit possessing a body. From what we know from the lore that they've added, both in the Rise of Skywalker novelization, some other source books, he's basically been creating clone bodies for himself, or had his acolytes, his Sith Eternal, creating the clone bodies for him for years as he continues to try to inhabit them, but none of them are powerful enough to sustain his spirit, his soul, if you will. It won't, none of them can sustain him. It's why he's doing midichlorian research as early as the Bad Batch. It's why he's doing midichlorian research and the Mandalorian and season 2 stuff we've seen, season 1 as well. He's trying to find some vessel that he can transform into, and he doesn't find that until he discovers he has a granddaughter slash daughter in Rey, because one of his clones has a daughter, so it's really his daughter. Um, if you think about it that way. But yes, Ray is, a being whose midichlorian count, whose, connection to the Palpatine bloodline can sustain him. That's why he is in the film not a person until he absorbs the life-giving power of the dyad, which is, you know, the power of the dyad. The dyad in general is created in episode 9, even though it's started in episode 8. But then the idea that it can give life to somebody is created just in that scene in episode 9, and we're still waiting, for more information about that.
Yeah, like Liam said, definitely more entity than just Palpatine, 100%, obviously. Like, we don't even really know how much of that body is even Palpatine, because in canon, at least, clones can't become force sensitive like the original body as the template, right? So, this is not like a Star Killer situation, Force Unleashed 2, where it's like, oh, it's the memories and everything that are like haunting him and breaking him apart. Like, no, but he still has crazy force powers. It's like, no, it just doesn't happen that way. Which I think I like that. I do like that. There's something like almost ungraspable, something unable to be held on to. Like, there's a lot about Dark Empire that I think Rise of Skywalker actually did well visually, but I never liked the idea of, like, taking what was already, like, a pretty arcane sort of characterization for Palpatine in Episode 6 and taking it to the point of, like, stupefaction, like, you're like, "Oh, he's just a floating little ghost cloud," at points, like, I like this. You're blending everything. We don't need to see what happens in the in between. It's like an instant transmission. He dies on the Death Star. His mind occupies a body, and it's not working because there's no way to contain all of that, right? I like that stuff. I think it's Dark Empire is never gonna be my favorite thing, but I frankly I do like how the Rise of Skywalker at least takes some of the more interesting ideas and makes it a little bit more like, oh, there is potential here. There is stuff that can be dug into, and maybe even mine for some stuff like Starfighter moving forward with the Sith Eternal. But yeah, he's not really the Palpatine that we know in the first 6 films. And, I mean, if you read Dark Empire, like, there's an implication when he first meets Luke that he's like, "Oh, I have died many times before." Like, the Luke that he meets isn't even really, like, the original either, which is very creepy and dark, but, it's definitely something that I think the version that we see in The Rise of Skywalker is playing and leaning more into, like, "Yeah, I'm not really the same guy. I might have all the same thoughts. I might be the soul of of the original host, but I've been unable to really manifest myself the way I want to and feel whole again until his semi-daughter, granddaughter shows up on the scene, and he's willing to, like, sacrifice his agony almost to, like, let her take over and rule. Because, I mean, that is the implication. It's not like I don't really think he's gonna be, like, in a situation like Bane and Xana where he tries to, like, take over Xana's body and, like, rule. He, like, kinda gets lost in there. I think the implication is Palpatine's almost willing to give up. Like, he'll probably be a dominant voice inside Rey, but he's like, "Yeah, this isn't really working, but if I can at least be passing it on to a Palpatine who I can, like, influence and corrupt over time more and more to be like me, that's the next best thing."
We got a super chat from Skywalker's Academy. Thank you for contributing to the show tonight, Skywalker's Academy. We really appreciate that. Skywalker's Academy says Dathan was made from Luke's hand and Palpatine's blood, so they're both her grandfathers. If you think about it, Rey is the only way to continue. And then says the Skywalker bloodline is not dead. Yeah, well, I mean, that's something that could definitely play up with when you bring her back is, clarifying that for larger audiences as
Yeah.
well, because that's something that would have been nice or cool to at least show in the Rise of Skywalker, right? Because like we're all privy to these lore bits and these information, especially when it's like a novelization that comes out right after the film comes out. But larger audiences only have so much of a chance to give their first impression, and I think if the Luke hand thing was part of the film and it was originally supposed to be in the in the Force Awakens, if it was part of the series and it was carried into the Rise of Skywalker in the movie itself, then you start to build those threads and it could have shown that a little bit better. So something they should bring back, definitely. But it's exciting to kind of play with those things because like the inherent idea of her being this unification of the Skywalkers and Palpatines is like not a bad one. It's just the execution that was poor. So if they could figure out a way to, and this is what we've said for a long time, and I've been kind of adamant about this in the future, is I think the way you make Rey interesting, the way you make her likable, is to continue to push the fact that she is this descendant of Palpatine. This is this kind of almost created being. She's just so different. It's hard for her to, carry on these lineages will also be her own thing. And I think you have her deal with the struggles of that. It can't just vanish because she defeated Palpatine. Like, what's it like? The fact that she had to destroy her grandfather. What's it like now that she, was dead and resurrected by by Kylo Ren. There's like a lot of things that make her different. And if they actually go in on those things and use those things that make her different instead of constantly being, oh, well, I'm the, the symbol of this or symbol of that. I got to use the legacy saber. Make her be herself. Make her be somebody. Don't let her just be the face of all the throwbacks and the references to other movies. And ultimately, then the person takes the baton. So when they do that in the future, that's a big thing to play. You can't just ignore these things about her. You have to use them, and you have to use them to define her as a unique individual. And that's going to be one of the big jobs of whatever movie tackles her next.
Definitely. I mean, if you look at the sequels, unintentionally, there is a lot of world building that can now be excavated that's kind of parallel real world stuff and all that, but this is completely just tied to the lore of it, right? Like, this is something that you see in a comic adaptation, and you're like, "Oh, like, this is really interesting. Oh," and then Vader sees it in his 2020 run, you're like, "Why was that not even, like, hinted at or shown in the film," right? And it's crazy because you look at something as early as Heir to the Empire, the Luke clone is from the hand, right? It's not from anything else. Like, this is a concept that's not, like, wholly original. This has been done before, and here it would make a lot of sense to just, like, connect it. But maybe it was there originally. Maybe that was part of the original script, and we probably would have had Luke kind of haunting more if they kept in that hand and him haunting Ben Solo more. So you have this, half Skywalker because obviously his father is a Solo in Ben's side, and then you have this artificial Skywalker who, not by choice from either party, right? Not by Palpatine, not by the Skywalkers, is kind of pushed together, put together, right? Like, this is an assembled Skywalker Palpatine hybrid, right? Together, they're like a whole Skywalker, right? And I get the whole argument that, like, oh, shouldn't we be calling and natural born descendant of Leia, like a Skywalker. Yeah, but she rejects the notion. This is not like Legends Leia where you'd have to have a book like Tatooine Ghost with her like finally being like, okay, this is why I've named my youngest son Anakin Solo. She doesn't have that in canon. She hates her father, and she has every right to. The dude tortured her. He was a monster, destroyed her whole life, right? A life that wasn't supposed to happen, yet did, and then that was ripped away, right? So having a little bit more fleshed out in episode 9, again, this should have been a 3-hour film. For if this was a saga closer, why couldn't have incorporated more and more details of the prequels, more of the lore of the original trilogy, more world building? 15 minutes, you can do a lot with that. You can do a lot with that, and just visually not having that there is it's a shame, but it is canon to a degree. Like, now is your chance to, like, be like, "Okay, for the people who are like, "Oh, she's never truly a Skywalker," you can be like, "You're right. She's not truly a Palpatine either. She's not a Skywalker. She's like an abomination. She's like Frankenstein's monster in a lot of ways. She's just kind of combined from so many different parts of arcane things, of these lineages, right? It's a wild little thing to really consider there, but while you kinda show that visually off and kinda play off of, like, people are like, "Oh, she's got no real reason or connection to Skywalkers." Establish that, that's cool. You have, like Liam saying, like, a little bit more of, like, the fight between the Palpatine side of her and the Skywalker side of her. She will be a Skywalker by name. That's a choice. That's what she's taken up. That's her adopted family. That's who she sides with, right? That's her kind of version of the victory. But that doesn't mean, like, things like the Sith Eternal are you just gonna be like, "Oh, she's gone now, like, we're not gonna hunt her down." Like, of course they wanna have her, and maybe they wanna have her as installed on the throne. Maybe there's a bunch of them who are, like, split over, like, "Oh, some of us wanna follow her, some of us don't." Like, she is the blood of Palpatine. What are we gonna do there, right? Like, you think they're just gonna ignore her? I mean, yeah, the movie implies that they all get kinda die, but really, it's a whole planet. It's not like the whole thing exploded. There's definitely many more all around. They're not all just in the Citadel there. So I can definitely see stuff like that going on there. You know, the whole name of the Skywalkers is not like it's a clean thing either, right? Oh, you choose to be a Skywalker. Anakin was outed as like, oh, Darth Vader is Leia's what is it, father, and we find out like, oh, that ruined her reputation. Luke's on his own in a way, and he's become a bit of a myth, so it doesn't really help there. But the people do find out that he disappears, and then he shows up. Okay, cool, he's got that myth, but people in the resistance know that he abandoned them in a way. He didn't wanna be part of the fight. It took Rey bringing him back there. Skywalkers are not clean either. And I think kind of being forced to juggle both legacies, one that almost is adamant about wanting her, another that doesn't really have anything concrete anymore left. Yeah, it's gonna force her to carve her own path and pick and choose what makes sense and completely mute things. There's a lot of story potential, arguably with the Palpatine side of her coming in more and more, and what that makes her reflect on her Skywalker side, what she's gonna do, what she's maybe gonna clear the name of that, maybe what she's gonna do to, like, advocate for Ben even though he's gone, right? If there is a chance of Adam Driver in, like, the next 10 years reprising his role, swapping places back and forth in the netherworld of the Force or something like that, you can do a lot of things in between while she's growing into who she is on her own. There's so much potential there. It'd be a waste to just be like, "Oh, she's a Skywalker, that's it." Like, no, she might think that, but nobody else around her is willing to, outside of her friends, to just let her be. And if you're gonna try to restart an academy, there's probably other stragglers who are like Order 66. I remember that. Okay, here's some stragglers of like the newbies from Skywalker's Luke's first academy who are like gonna be like, we can't do this the same way again. It didn't work when there was 1,000 years behind it. It didn't work when Luke tried to balance all of these different eras. What are you gonna do different? And maybe they're like, "You're a Skywalker, why would I trust another one?" Every time you guys are associated with the Jedi, something explodes and we all die, right? Like, there's gonna be a lot of people who will accept her being a good person, but probably don't accept her just, like, wanting to do things the same way, even if she wanted to, right? So, it's gonna be really interesting. I'm exactly excited for it. Um, like you said, Skywars Academy, the bloodline's not dead, right? But what does that bloodline even mean? It's so twisted and jumbled together that nobody's gonna be truly happy, and I think that's gonna really make Rey a lot more of a three-dimensional character.
Well, then Skywalker's Academy follows up with that they shouldn't have shown the Luke's hand thing because it would be too much of a spoiler hint, and that the mystery box from JJ and Ryan pushed misdirection hard to sell us on Kylo's reason. The reason Ben Solo fell to the dark side, they'll clarify those things, but in the movies wasn't the time. And then says the sequels were made to be controversial, so people would talk about Star Wars for 10 years until we get the answers. I assume that's a joke, but it's a good one. History repeats itself if we don't learn from it. Yeah, so I mean, I the thing is, I agree with some of what you said, but I disagree that the movies aren't the time to show things like that. Like those are important things for backstory. We don't have to show Ben Solo's fall, but if you're gonna redeem him, we need more information about his time as a Jedi before the redemption. We need to see the good sides of him. Really, what's there is a push and pull between storytellers where you have the Ryan doubling down on the darkness and the doubling down on the Rey as nobody, and then in the Rise of Skywalker, the pullback from it, right? So if you're going to so dramatically change things that are set up from the previous film, you have to provide, not just reasons why, but like you have to show that change. That we have to see the change. We don't necessarily see that often. And I think with the Rey thing, especially if you want to, throw in the Skywalker part, if you want to use that piece of lore bit as why she is eligible to adopt the Skywalker name, which I don't think was whatsoever the intention of the end of the movie. I think that's something that's added either from notes and ideas thought up by Abrams and Chris Terrio when they were writing it, and then eventually it made its way into source books and to novelizations, or it's just something they came up with after. But the end of the movie is really it's all about claimed family versus accepted family and who you're born in, what family you're born into, and what decisions you make. And just because your lineage, Star Wars lineages often define characters, but this time a character's choosing to not be a part of that lineage. There's a lot of messages there about family and stuff like that. It's kind of important to know then, who this character's family is and how those things impact. And we see that character deal with those things on screen. We don't necessarily see her deal with those things on screen. She has a brief moment where she thinks she accidentally killed Chewbacca, and then like immediately she's just turns around and like, okay, well now we go to Kajimi. It's like not really a thing. Like, it's not something we sit with for a while. And it's part of the runtime problem It's a lot of ways, but if it was planned outright, those are absolutely things you include into the film. They're things that end up getting cut because the movies weren't planned out well, and because Rise of Skywalker had major story beats and character changes that didn't fit the runtime that it actually got, and so that's why those things are changed.
Yeah, I mean, you could say mystery box. I don't think Ryan Johnson had a mystery box. It's just JJ. He's had the reputation since Lost, and he had criticisms for Lost. You know, that's probably the best version of the mystery box kind of being played out. It's just why. Like, I don't understand how he almost duped all of Hollywood into being like, "Hey, I'm a good guy in getting all these budgets in order, getting the right talent. I'm not gonna deny any of that stuff." But the mystery box thing is, like, one of the biggest cop outs ever. Like, he had a, like, a $300 million development contract with Warner Brothers, and nothing came out of it. Like, he had one TV show that he had planned may or may not come out, like, I don't know. As a writer, I've never been truly impressed. As a director, I think he's got a lot of flair. I think you look at a lot of Nine cinematography, the moving camera, it's actually quite effective. He definitely grows as a director throughout his career. I think he's pretty great at action when he wants to be. But again, execution was always the biggest problem in Nine. And for the guy who, his biggest selling point at the beginning of his Star Wars journey was the mystery box, how do you close it after? Like, what do you take out? What do you examine? What do you live with, right? Ryan Johnson did. I disagree with the whole idea of having him be right after, The Force Awakens. I don't like that he has kinda had input in the end of The Force Awakens, kinda ending on that shot, which again, not a great shot to end on just visually, having a spinning camera on Luke and Rey meeting, but from what he's directly said in interviews, he's like, "Yeah, I gave some notes to JJ to kinda connect and line up our films." Maybe that wasn't even intended to have that shot, right, of, like, reaching out with a lightsaber. Maybe it was just supposed to be, like, Luke turning around, and then we'd probably jump into a year ahead or something like that. We don't know, right? But the mystery box thing was n just JJ. That's for sure, but I don't know. I get what you're saying about Ben Solo. I get it, but that fine. You can do that for the first film. What about the second and third? And JJ, if you don't think that, Ryan Johnson did some interesting things with Kylo, JJ still introduced the whole point of like Kylo Ren was Ben Solo. So let's have the guy who brought up that whole twist deal with it. He doesn't at all, right? He doesn't give it a line. Like I don't get why people give so much like leeway to JJ when, these are the characters that he brought here. And, you hear interviews about John Boyega being like, "Oh, thank you. I'm not gonna ever work on Star Wars without JJ," and all that. But his role, whatever was sold to him, was definitely not what came out in the final version for someone who was not super pleased publicly with what Ryan Johnson did with his character. Why would, Adam Driver be super pleased that the one time that he gets to actually be Ben Solo, it's just with his mother and, giving him, like, a forced projection of his dead father that he killed, and then one line, which is not even a line, it's just "Oomph," because he jumped onto a statue, right? Like, the mystery box was great, sure, but you gotta answer what comes out of it and what the implications are, and even if we don't get flashbacks, because the Skywalker Saga doesn't really do flashbacks, to, like, a huge degree, like, extended degrees, you still need to, like, have that character be fleshed out, at least in the time that he's been redeemed before his death, right? So, I don't agree with that, and I get your whole idea of, like, it being too much of a spoiler hint. I think it's only a spoiler hint if the Skywalker lightsaber was still being clutched in the hand itself. It's just a hand, right? Like, we have 3 fully, like, formed Snokes without, like, all this, like, damage to the body and the tanks. Was that, like, a plan to bring out a Snoke 2 or something? We don't know. Is it, like, that he's using the Snoke formula to shape up the body? You can scatter all these things visually, and I don't think people will necessarily be locked in like, "Oh, that's Luke's hand." Like, how would you know, right? It's not like you'll see any servos in it. The servos only come in because he gets the artificial hand, right? It could just be some white person's hand. There's a lot of people on Exegol with no sun. A lot of pale looking people there. It could be anybody. It could be a Sith Eternal follower, right? You don't know, right? So I think if the lightsaber's there, I get your point. Without it, that's a nice, like, hint to somebody like us, like the big fanatics, like, "Oh, pay attention to that. That could have importance." Like, it's like a Chekhov's gun to us. But for the general audience member, it's like, "Okay, there's a bunch of random things here, like, oh, that's interesting." Why did they hang on that shot for a little longer, right? I think it totally would've worked fine. It would give a lot more fuel to people who defend Rise of Skywalker being like, "Here's literal proof. You don't have to wait for a comic. It's in the movie of them hinting that Rey's not just the daughter of a Palpatine clone, that there is something part of the process of creating this Palpatine clone that is inherently Skywalker too, and so is she, right?" And then you'd have a much stronger point to what you're trying to make there about adopted family, choosing who you are, all that making sense because she has that warring conflict. And again, like Liam said, the runtime with all these things that are making her push and pull between like what she's facing, upon these realizations about herself, on being delivered by Ben. You could have had time for her to deal with all these things. You could have had a couple scenes with Kylo kind of dealing with like what does it mean to be a Skywalker now, being like to a degree, being, like, recruited by a Palpatine, their eternal enemy of sorts, right? There's a lot of, like, just considerations about both of their connections to Skywalker bloodline that could have happened more directly for him, but also indirectly for her if you had just played out a lot of the same beats and just given more time and a couple extra visual cues.
Well, thank you for the super chat, Skywalker's Academy. Appreciate the question. We're going to scroll back up to Anthony Tiff, who says, "Do you think there could be multiple chosen ones as in Legends? We seem to have had several very powerful Jedi who were like Anakin, Ulic Qel-Droma, Revan, Mitra Surex, Teal Shawn, and even Cade Skywalker." I think you've asked a similar question, or somebody has in the past, and I'll say, my summarized answer of some what I've kind of said in the past about this is just that I think there can be plenty of people. You can throw Ray in there as well if you want to talk about in canon. There can be plenty of people who are chosen by the Force to be, an ambassador for the light or ambassador from the dark, but they aren't the chosen one. The chosen one is one person, and it's Anakin Skywalker. So, whatever the significance of what Anakin does in Return of the Jedi and really throughout his entire life, that's reserved to his story. He's the chosen one. I don't think there's any other chosen ones. But there can be people who are imbued with, more midichlorians, more power than other people who are brought forth from the light or brought forth from the dark to combat and create this balance. And we've seen that throughout the galaxy. So yes, there can be people who the Force calls upon to be a champion of one side or the other at that time, but I don't think any of those people, Ulic, Revan, Mitra, Teal, Cade, Jason and Jaina, any of these people, Darth Plagueis, are chosen ones. It is just Anakin, and these people are champions of the Force at their times in their life.
Yeah, I'm mostly in agreement with that line of thought. Obviously, Acolyte has complicated Anakin's role as, like, the literal chosen one. But there's always been a complication, I think, within the Star Wars fandom of, like, is the chosen one more of, like, midichlorian count, power level, right, versus, like, role in the story, role in the balancing of the Force, right, of the light side being balanced, right? I think that's where a lot of this, like, "Oh, chosen one," like, prophecy being misinterpreted kinda has a lot of leeway with people because the characters that we kinda associate as possible other chosen ones kinda happen to be the most powerful representatives. Obviously, Mitra Surik is a video game character. Video game characters are always gonna be much stronger when you get to play as them versus, like, what lore probably says about them, right? If you read if you read the Revan book, she's knocked out pretty quickly and killed off compared to what we see there with Revan there. Ulic Qel-Droma, you can argue, is not the chosen one of his era because when Frieden Nad has him and Exar Kun fight each other, they're almost equals, right? And Frieden's like, "Alright, XR seems to have, like, a slight advantage, or I just like him more," and gives him the power. Does that necessarily make him, like, he could have very easily been the master and XR been the apprentice, right? Does that now put XR on a path towards redemption and becoming the chosen one? Not really, right? Like, that's not how I go with it. Um I fully buy into the idea that the chosen one prophecy is misinterpreted, and because people would see these examples throughout history, they're like, "Okay, what's, like, one common that a lot of them have?" They seem to have, like, a high M count, a lot of midichlorians to them, and then when you hear about a virgin birth and all that, you're like, "Okay," and just the fact that they were way past Yoda's, right? Like, crazy. I mean, do we look at Yoda on that same argument, like, as a chosen one because of his midichlorian count? Not really. He lives through so many different eras and so many different Jedi that you could feasibly say are chosen ones for their time. They're chosen as, like, champions of the Force, like Liam says, like, for that moment, what is the Force asking of them? What is the Force trying to channel through them? The Force reacted to Plagueis almost solving, like, the creation of life and the full control of the midichlorians ripped away from just it being a spiritual, like, part of nature, right? And then the Force is like, "Okay, no, 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 we gotta do something about it." Bam, here comes Anakin. How May and Osha fit into it, I really don't think they're purely virgin births, right? I think there's some just strange Sith alchemy or Plagueis involved and virgins of the Force playing a role there. They're not gonna really conflict with what's going on with, Anakin here, but yeah, just different chosen ones just doesn't make sense to me. I think the prophecy was always meant to just be like, this is a cycle that continues. These are people who are chosen for their time, right? But the literal chosen one is just how because it got, hidden away, it took so many years of like finding this prophecy and it keeps on being revisited by people who are looking for like deeper answers as the order is shifting more and more to like statistics and numbers and facts for like order, for like guaranteeing survival of the Jedi, the role in the Senate, kind of being their watchdogs of the galaxy. When it happens, you're like, this is a perfect candidate, but was he really supposed to be? Not really. I mean, Anakin could have just been a pod racer his whole life and nobody would have known the difference, right? Like it was because the Force kind of brought about Qui Gon and all of this and that. And Qui Gon was like, "Oh, I think this is it. This is what I've been searching for my whole life." Qui Gon almost kind of shapes the narrative around him, right? I don't know. And even Anakin might not be like a supposed to be a chosen one. He just might have been the most powerful thing, and maybe eventually the Force would have forced Plagueis or Palpatine to confront something more powerful than them. But the way that it played out, I don't know, not necessarily, right? So all these other characters that you mentioned, they're cool, they're powerful, but it's really up to just the writers kind of wanting to have a lot of power in play, a lot of abilities. There's nothing more to it. I think the chosen one is always gonna be Anakin, and that's just the way we gotta leave it at.
Nurilk555 says, "Can you guys name 10 Jedis?" I think we could both name 10 Jedis.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
Brandon Jones says, "What do you guys think of Liam Neeson's new GQ interview where he said he doesn't believe Qui-Gon Jinn wouldn't be easily beaten by Darth Maul in The Phantom Menace?" Yeah, so that's been a story that's been going around. I mean, so first off, Liam Neeson is currently promoting his new comedy, The Naked Gun. And so I think in a lot of these interviews, he's trying to be funny. And if you listen to it, he's like basically joking, like, "Oh, what? I thought I was this big bad Jedi Master, and I just get beaten by a couple moves like a fake out." He's like, he's teasing. So I don't think he means anything really by it. And also, if you go beyond the lore, Qui-Gon is the first person to fight and live to tell about it, fighting a Sith in 1,000 years, and he obviously is not used to fighting that fighting style, even if he is a big bad Jedi Master. And so I think lore wise, to me, it still makes plenty of sense. Could he have lasted maybe a little bit longer? Sure, that's already a big epic duel, though. Um, and the Force kind of willed it, through the Duel of the Fates that he lose this, this mentor figure. It's just kind of this twist of fate, for lack of a better term. But yeah, so I mean, if you watch the actual interview, it's not like he's really critiquing the movie. He's kind of teasing and joking about his character and his involvement within the film.
Yeah, I mean, dude's acted in so many films, like, he's finally gotten away from doing these, like, BC level movie action thriller sort of things, kinda aging a little bit more gracefully now, and Naked Gun is just him kinda having fun, and the dude's in, like, love with Pamela Anderson right now. They're having, like, a sweet romance. He hasn't married or dated anyone, like, for this long or this publicly since his ex-wife passed away, right? So he's kinda just happy and joking around and being jovial because it's necessary for this very slapstick surrealist comedy, right? So, yeah, I don't think there's really anything to it. I He wants to say that his character that has he probably knows has only gained a reputation since 1999, right? As like, oh, he was one of the best. He was the coolest. Oh, you read all this lore from EU days. Him and Mace were like old training sparring partners. Like he should have been like. I don't think he knows any of these things, right? Like, but us fans, we kind of convolute statements like this because of these different things and tidbits that we've read or watched or played as. So I don't think there's really anything to it. Uh, but if I were to answer it, I think he's wrong. I think, first of all, nobody really knows how to face a double-sided lightsaber. There's no real history or knowledge of that since like 1,000 plus years at minimum, right? There's people with two lightsabers, right? But that's you train in that. That's part of like a Jedi form too. But for a guy who practices Form 4, Ataru, just supposed to be, like, super agile, jumping, like, almost, like, graceful in a way, but also is known to be very exhausting physically, even if we're gonna say, like, his Dathomiri, background as a knight, as a no, he's not a Dathomir, he's, what's
Darth
the
Maul
species?
Zabrak.
Zabrak, yeah, I don't know, I always forget it. I was about to say Trandoshan, I'm like, that doesn't make sense. But it is Zabrak origin, right? And, maybe some influence of Mother Talzin that still courses through his veins at this point, and everything that he's probably been stimulated by Palpatine is in a comparable human age-wise range is, like, in his early 20s at best versus somebody who's, like, closer to his 50s. Yeah, I mean, if they both are doing Ataru, if they both had, like, single lightsabers, I still think Maul takes it. Over time, it's less about, like, "Oh, he's gonna lose because of arrogance and all that." He does to Obi-Wan in the end, right? But that's only after he's beating them both 2v1, right? Like, he's handling them both very easily. Oh, Qui-Gon gets a couple of shots on him, but dude just jumps around and spins around, he's fine, right? And he lures him into a situation where Form 4, which is all about jumping and being agile, being in the air, striking while you're in the air, is not accessible, and that long in a fight when it's been pretty even 2v1 and, maybe more slightly towards them all, but then once you're kinda trapped in this place for, like, a minute or 2, it's been, like, 30 minutes of a fight or however long you wanna really play it out. Dude is tired. Dude is not gonna win this. I don't think Qui-Gon, as wonderful as a Jedi as he is not known as, like, "Oh, he's, like, one of the best martial combat players." Like, no, no, and it sucks that, we never really got to see Samuel L. Jackson be able to play, a fully martialized version of Mace Windu against Palpatine because George decided to, like, minimize how much they're using their stunt double there for Ian, but if we did get a full version and we got to see that version paired to, like, what we see with Maul and what we see with Qui-Gon, then people would be like, "Oh, no, look, we have in the movies itself, like, someone around his age is already much better than him too, right? Or probably more willing to keep up a fight against Maul." So, I don't buy that. He's a spiritual dude at the end of the day. He's like a Jedi hippie, right? He's someone he's not gonna be like, "Oh, I have to be, like, on top of, like, all my stats right now." That's not really what the Force calls him to do. He's not bad by any means, but I think Obi-Wan always had a much more of a chance, and once he dies, right, once Qui-Gon dies, Obi-Wan changes his form too. He almost died using the same form. What does he do? He becomes a defensive master. Ataru switches to Soresu, right? What is that, like, even better against? The Gem So, right? Like, come on, like, this guy was ready for Anakin. He was ready for the mistakes of his master and then the mistakes of his own apprentice, right? So, if we're gonna really break it down that technically, no, I think Maul just gets the short end of the stick because he's going up against the literal goats of the galaxy, but it's not like he was beating any, like, superstars, right? He's beating A, B tier players, but once he gets to S tier, he's not. It's just a fact.
Then Brandon follows that up and says, "Do you think Qui-Gon would have trained Anakin as a more powerful and well-disciplined Jedi Knight compared to Obi-Wan if he didn't die in the Phantom Menace?" Definitely more disciplined, and I think it's not necessarily just because Obi-Wan was too young, whereas Qui-Gon, being a little bit older, would command a little bit more respect, and then obviously had that initial relationship with Anakin. But it's because Qui-Gon was a little bit more understanding. They were similar personalities in some ways. Qui-Gon questioned things, whereas Obi-Wan didn't. There were things that were completely different about their personalities. It's one of the reasons why Obi-Wan Qui-Gon works so well, but it's also another reason why Anakin Qui-Gon would have worked so well. So yes, I think he would have made him a lot more disciplined, and maybe with discipline would have come power. But I think the way he is kind of left to be a little bit more unleashed under Obi-Wan's rule, he's able to manifest a little bit more raw power than maybe Qui-Gon would have had him achieving. But yes, absolutely more disciplined under Qui-Gon.
I'm gonna have to disagree, but not in the way that you might be thinking, Liam. I think he would have been a very powerful Force user, but, I mean, we look at the film itself, Qui-Gon's like, "I'm gonna take on Anakin," and they're like, "You already have an apprentice." He's like, "Okay." He's ready for the trials, like, I'm done with him, right? And Obi-Wan's obviously, like, excited, but probably also like, "Okay, I guess that's happening right now." But let's say he survives, right? Because he's so much more focused on the chosen one prophecy, on doing what's right for that ultimate battle between good and evil, on defeating the Sith, right? I in no way do I see it being like a situation where he stays with the order. He already has so many troubles with it. Like when he gets offered a seat in Master and Apprentice on the council, he has to give up his for some reason his apprenticeship to Obi-Wan. And he's like by the end, he's like, I'd rather stick with Obi-Wan. I this is what's more important to me, like being able to make these connections and foster it. I don't really care at all about what you're saying about, like, being able to influence the macro changes of the galaxy as, like, Jedi like Ki-Adi-Mundi would, right? He's like, "This is my focus. This is Anakin." Like I said, he's a space hippie. He's going where the living and cosmic force align, where it draws him out to. He's like a way seeker. He kinda is like a way seeker. So in no way do I think that he's actually staying in the order, honestly. I think at some point within a year or 2, which we've seen in comics too, Anakin a couple of times is, like, ready to leave, and Obi-Wan is almost, like, willing to agree and, like, be like, "You know what? Qui-Gon would have done the same thing." Qui-Gon would have been probably would have heard that, been like, "Yeah, you know what, Anakin? We're not just gonna leave, we're just gonna start traveling across the galaxy, do all the things that make sense to you. I can give structure around that and teach you these lessons while we're doing these things, but yeah, let's visit your mother. Let's go back and free all the other slaves. Let's do all these things that the Jedi are refusing to do, that Obi-Wan never goes against because that's not what the Order, as it's trained him and the rules that he follows would be willing to do, right? He might have some feelings for it, but Qui-Gon's like, "No, I'm a man of action. I'm feel, don't think. Like I'm gonna do what feels right for Anakin." I don't think they would be considered Jedi. I wouldn't be surprised if he's like, "Yeah, you can take my lightsaber. What matters more to me is, like, I make sure this kid is well balanced and what he needs. He's not gonna be like anybody else, so why would I put him into a structure that's gonna force him to be like everybody else, right?" And you guys are already saying he's too late, he's got these emotional attachments. Okay, he does. Let me actually use it to his benefit, right? So I think he would have been a great Force user. Would he have become like this martial expert? No, because that's not part of Palpatine's plan. Palpatine also kind of is relying on the Jedi to train him to be put into a structure where they're becoming more and more tasked with protecting the core worlds and drawing them ever closer to the Clone Wars, where, and being the father figure in his own way too. He's like, "Oh, you're so much more powerful, Anakin. I've seen some of your training. You're so cool." Like, of course, Anakin's gonna lean more and more into that. He's with Qui-Gon traveling across the galaxy. He's probably more like a martial fighter, alright, and he's probably really good at that too, don't get me wrong, but he probably is also trying to be more spiritual like Qui-Gon, like help appease people's emotions, connect people, like balance things and communities and all that. He would be like a wandering spirit, a way seeker for the Jedi Order, but, for the galaxy as a whole more than anything else and what the Force deems is correct.
I don't disagree with that, but I think overall he would be more disciplined because he
Yeah,
would
yeah,
be.
yeah.
So that's my point. I think he'd be more disciplined, and more in control of his emotions, more in control of his powers, less encouraged to figure things out or less beat down by Obi Wan's attempt to act older than he is, attempt to be.
Yeah,
more stern, more of a father figure. Obi-Wan does the classic compensation that a lot of younger parents do, a lot of younger teachers, younger mentors do, in that you can really go one of two ways. You either have to be ultra firm because nobody respects you because you're young, or you have to be like bros with them. And Obi-Wan decides not to go the bro route. He decides to be over firm and then therefore pushes Anakin into acting out and then, giving into his impulses and less Jedi, you know, potential. And so if he stuck with Qui-Gon, no matter what they did when it comes to the Jedi Order, I think the discipline would be there because he'd have somebody to share his emotions and feelings with, and I think Qui-Gon wouldn't summarily dismiss them or tell him just ignore them like Obi-Wan did when he was young. But yeah, thanks for that question. Skywalker's Academy says the whole point in Anakin's training is that he needs is the needs he had, the influence Palpatine had on him, the father figure he needed died. Yep, that's right. And then the fandom. Okay, we already said the fandom traveler. We're in our last 10 minutes or so of the stream, everybody. So send in your last few questions if you have them. If you want to send in a super chat, support the channel, get guaranteed to be on tonight's stream, you're welcome to do so. If not, we're going to round out these last few questions for the last 10 minutes or so here. Brandon Tran says, non-Star Wars question, have you guys seen the popular racing film with Brad Pitt and Javier Bardem, F1 by Joseph Kosinski, who also did Top Gun Maverick and Tron Legacy? Yes, I believe we both have seen it. I thought it was very, very good. The racing stuff was absolutely incredible. I mean, it's one of those movies similar to Top Gun Maverick that just won't be as good if you don't watch it in theaters because it's such a atmospheric experience. Like you want to feel the sound, you want to be able to feel the loudness of the sound, hear, every little detail in those speakers. You want to be able to see crystal clear clarity, the big, shots within the driving seat of these F1 cars. You want to feel all that. So it's one of those things that definitely worth checking out in theaters. The story itself is, pretty formulaic, basic sports story that you see all the time, but it still works well, and I think it's pretty good. But yeah, definitely something worth checking out in theaters, and it's probably only going to be in theaters for about another couple weeks at most, if it's still in your theater. So check it out if you haven't seen it.
yeah, I've seen it twice. Once with some friends, once with my parents, both in IMAX. Definitely recommend it in that format. Kosinski is who is like almost like an adult blockbuster filmmaker. He's going for like stuff that is a little bit more grounded in what people are looking for now. Obviously, Legacy's not super grounded, but he is an action superstar, and that was like his first real. Well, I guess you can also say that, and Oblivion really developed him into who he is by the time Top Gun
Yeah.
Maverick happens. Top Gun Maverick is when he takes it to a whole different level. This is him kinda doing that together, right? I know he's been, like, talking, I don't know if it's anything really gonna happen, but taking Tom Cruise's character from Days of Thunder and have him meet up with Brad Pitt in, like, a sequel, I don't think that's really gonna happen. It's a nice closed loop anyways with these films. Um but he takes, like, a little bit more serious approach to his blockbusters at a technical level without, like, getting super sci-fi like a Christopher Nolan would, right? Without getting kinda childish like how Star Wars, MCU, any of these big franchises kinda appeal more to kids, right? I think it's all pretty good. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I like Brad Pitt a lot. Um I think the soundtrack's actually pretty underrated too. But yeah, I mean, he's someone I wanna see handle a Star Wars film. I think he'd be someone who'd do great in a Starfighter, but, it's kinda sucks because he did Maverick. It's gonna be hard to, like, differentiate from that. Like, even Maverick's whole, like, final, like, battle plan is just them doing, like, a trench run. Like, it's quite literally just that with, like, a little extra moves, right? It is literally a New Hope, so it's like, what can he do now? Right? So, if he does it, he'd have to be leaning more into, like, a rogue squadron and stuff like that, but and, like, characterizations there and, like, that group dynamics and stuff like that, but no, I liked it a lot. I'm a big Brad Pitt fan, like I said, so I like seeing him. I like him being kind of he's kind of become this, like, stoic, cowboy of sorts in the last, like, few years. He does, like, comedic stuff with it, but he's kind of harder to read in a lot of more of his more recent roles, which kind of plays into, like, the aura that he has as, like, one of these older Hollywood icons and stars that are left that he is the attraction, not the movie, right? But It's good. Damson Idris is gonna become a star the way he's been developing his career from Snowfall to this. So yeah, I'm very excited for Kosinski's, like, alien film that he's gonna do at some point, like, UFO film or something that's happening, so I don't know how he's gonna pull that one off, but if it's another way of evolving his style from F1 and Top Gun, it's hard not to be excited.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Brad Pitt's really played basically since, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, like, the same character in,
Yeah.
like, everything, but it's a great character, and he does a good job playing, like, he was so famous for so long being the, like, basically icon, living off of being like the hottest actor in Hollywood, everybody loving him as an actor and as an icon. And now he's kind of playing off of just being this like suave, kind of cool guy. Like he's aged into this like this guy who's just gonna do his thing and just be cool, calm, and collected all the time. Blason's the movie as well. I thought that worked very well, and he's picking a lot of great projects recently. Brandon follows that up and says F1 is an incredible movie on the same tier as other solo films like Dune, Oppenheimer, and John Wick. No spoilers, but F1 is like a grown up version of Cars. Yeah, it's similar, I guess, to Cars, and that's just to what I'm saying, like in general with the plot. I wasn't expecting anything else, but it is, your classic sports story. You have your ups and downs. You have, you know, it actually has similar story almost to Cars 3, but way better. Because I didn't like Cars 3. I thought that one wasn't very good. But I also don't think it's nearly as good as Dune, Oppenheimer, and some of the best John Wicks, like John Wick 4, or John Wick. I really like John Wick 2, but I really personally I'd put all the John Wicks ahead of it, but it's close on the like John whatever your mid-tier John Wicks are. I think it's about as good as F1. So I wouldn't put it quite on that level for me, Brandon, but I'm glad you enjoyed it as much as you enjoyed all those other movies.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't put it on that level. I've read the Dune book. I've read Emperor Dune, so it's a great adaptation of it, and you and I have some problems with part 2 despite both of those films being really, really good, right? And there's so much depth and richness there. I wouldn't put it with Oppenheimer either because that's like a semi-biopic, like, kinda going into, like, one of the most confusing men in American history, like, one of the most devastating consequences for humanity, right? F1's a really great experiential film. I love feeling like I was, like, in the F1 car, but it's just a standard sports movie. There's better better plot-driven, richer subtext and meaning, car racing films like we have with Rush, like we have with Ford versus Ferrari, right? Those are things that are actually real stuff, real achievements, right? I think I look at F1 as, like, it's great to be in the driver's seat, and it's an awesome vibe, but I would never look like we've been talking about Brad Pitt, right? He's been kinda playing this kinda stoic cowboy character that has, he's a scoundrel, and you like him being a scoundrel, but there's not much else to it. Like, even this romance subplot, like, there's no real reason to have it there. Like, there's no point. It doesn't really I guess it makes sense, but, like, it's a six-year-old dude in a car that in a sport that a lot of times you're, like, 28, 29, you're already losing your technical abilities, right? It's not like golf, it's not like baseball where you can see players kinda keep playing. Like, you look at, like, Lewis Hamilton right now, he's already like, you can blame the engine, you can blame the car, but he's not anywhere near where he was, like, 5, 6 years ago as a driver. There's a it's a nice fun fictional film to me, right? And there's not much depth to it. It's just insanely awesome on a technical level. That's how I've always looked at it. And I get what you're saying, Brandon, it's everybody has a different ranking. That's totally what we're saying there, but I just don't think there's necessarily, like, thematic richness or history or, like, weight to this film in the way that these other films do. Super rewatchable, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot closer to Cars 3 than it is to Dune. It's not comparable, and I liked Cars 3 until it ended, and you're like, "That's it?" Like, there's, like, another 20 minutes of this, surely, like, we're finally getting somewhere, something, like, seriously developing out of this, and it's like, "No, that's the ending," right? I didn't feel that with F1, I was like, "You know what?" From the start, it was always about moving on to the next thing for the guy. He gets it, he gets his win, satisfies, like, a long lost part of himself, and then he moves on to just driving in Baja, right? So, it's it's a fun film, I would never put it at the same personally, at the same level as some of these richer, heavier, meatier films.
Yeah, I think it's a lot better than Cars 3, but I actually did really like the ending. I thought that was really well done. It could have been super cheesy,
Yeah.
formulaic, and boring, and I thought the way they did it, I was engaged the entire time. So really did enjoy it. Glad you enjoyed it, Brandon. And I think that's going to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like the video if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this. If you are new, make sure you join us every week. Every Tuesday, we do these streams talking about the latest in Star Wars news. And this week, we actually had some real Star Wars news to talk about. So that was fun. But if we don't have Star Wars news, we still always take your questions, your comments, anything you'd like to discuss with us in the chat. It's your time to talk about anything you want, not even just Star Wars related topics. We can talk about other things like F1 in the chat. So make sure you join us every single week. Keep an eye out on the channel for other great content. We got shorts every week. We've got videos every week. We've got a lot of great stuff coming forward here on the channel. We've got a review of the Bad Batch Sanctuary coming as well. The book just came out today for everybody else. We're still finishing it up, and then we're going to get you our review out by the end of the week. We have a lot of High Republic wrap-up stuff coming as well. We've been working on getting all of that out. We've got a timeline, recommended reading order, final reviews for everything. We're going to do tier lists for comics, tier lists for books, just giving you guys our full High Republic wrap up stuff as we finalize the High Republic here. The High Republic officially ended last week with the final comic book. And so we have now completed the High Republic Phase 3, and it's exciting to finish that wrap up. So hopefully you guys enjoy that, as well as a variety of other content coming here in the future. Thanks so much for watching tonight's stream, everybody, and we will see you all next time.